I'm going to run through, actually this is a beautiful picture of Hetch Hetchy Reservoir. And I'm going to run through the history of our water system. Most of you guys, if you have a lot of history with it, we can zip through these slides. And then I will talk about kind of what we've been faced with recently, our challenges with the system, and then carry you to today, where we are exactly with our system and the water supply situation. I don't have a lot on our current drought, so if you have questions or you want to talk about that afterwards, I didn't make some slides about it, but I'm happy to discuss that as we go along. So just an overview of the backbone of this system. We manage and operate a water delivery system that spans pretty much the width of California. And because California doesn't receive precipitation year-round, and also because the amount of precipitation that we get from year to year varies, we're heavily dependent on reservoir storage. And so the biggest part of the system, and the most significant from a water supply standpoint, is the Hetch Hetchy Reservoir. These are our upcountry facilities. There's also Cherry Reservoir and Lake Eleanor, which play a role in our water supply, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But nearly 85% of our water supply comes from Hetch Hetchy. It's a gravity-fed system. That water travels 167 miles down to the Bay Area, gravity, and also because the water in Hetch Hetchy Reservoir is so pure, we don't have to filter it. It doesn't go through a filtration system. It's disinfected with chlorine. Some ammonia is added to convert the chlorine to chloramine. And we add some pH, or we adjust the pH. We add some lime to adjust the pH so that the water doesn't corrode our pipes as it travels that distance. The remaining 15%, The remaining 15% of our water supply comes from 5 local reservoirs, 2 on the east side of the bay and 3 on the west side of the bay. The 2 on the east side of the bay are San Antonio Reservoir and Calaveras Reservoir, and on the west side of the bay we have Crystal Springs Reservoir, which is near the San Francisco Airport, and Kilorcitos Reservoir, which serves the Half Moon Bay and west side of the bay. The major system facilities. So we have 280 plus miles of pipelines, 60 miles of tunnels, 11 reservoirs, 5 pump stations, and 2 water treatment plants. The local system, so the 5 reservoirs that I showed you on the local side, that water does have to go through filtration. And so we have 2 filter plants, one on the East Bay side and one on the West Bay side, to treat that water. We also provide water not just to San Francisco, but we have 27 wholesale customers. We serve water almost entirely to San Mateo County, and then as you see, we ring the northern portion of Santa Clara County and the western side of the East Bay. Now, the system has a very, very rich history, and this is actually, I have some of these pictures that I'm going to show you are some of my favorites. In the early years, our water supply in San Francisco came from local creeks and springs. And in about 1849, we reached the point where those local springs and creeks couldn't serve the needs of San Francisco. And so we started actually importing water on ships from Sausalito, and they were sold by barrel from horse carts. Local entrepreneurs were charging about $24 for 1,600 gallons of water, which at that time seemed very expensive. To put it into some context, today you can get 3,700 gallons for $24. So despite what I will tell you about all the investment that went into the system, our water actually got cheaper over time. So this is actually a picture of Lobos Creek. This was one of the creeks that was used to serve water, and it still provides about 2 million gallons per day to the Presidio. This is a picture of one of our first local reservoirs that was built by the Spring Valley Water Works. And Spring Valley Water Works Spring Valley Water Company was one of the first water purveyors in the Bay Area to provide water to San Francisco. They had built dams in the mid to late 1800s, some of them which we still use today, Crystal Springs Dam, Kilorcitos Dam, and San Andreas Dam. Now, in 1906, San Francisco suffered suffered an enormous earthquake, and it really was a wake-up call to San Francisco. Many of the Spring Valley Water Company pipes had ruptured in soil liquefaction. And as we all know, San Francisco ended up burning for about 3 days. It was really a time where San Francisco felt there was a need to commit to a new water system, and one that San Francisco could control. This is the damage done to City Hall during that earthquake. So our first champion was the mayor at the time, Levin, and Levin led a civic reform movement and filed the city's first water rights filings at Hetch Hetchy. Because the development of the city's water rights needed the approval of the Secretary of the Interior, the applications were subject to a lot of political pressure, and so we now get into the controversy around building Hetch Hetchy. In 1903, Secretary Hitchcock actually denied San Francisco's first application. The controversy goes all the way back to that first attempt. But in 1908, the Secretary of Interior, Garfield, did grant the Garfield permit, which was a precursor to the Raker Act, and San Francisco received its water rights. This is a picture of Congressman Raker from Manteca, and he ultimately authored the legislation that passed in 1913. But that was only after another official, which was Secretary of Interior Ballinger, had to issue an order to show cause in 1910. So again, that political pressure, even though Garfield had already given the permit, there was yet another round with a new Secretary of Interior that wanted San Francisco to prove why the Hetch Hetchy should be built before other parts of the system were built, and why the supplies were even necessary. Ultimately, though, John Muir also came into the picture and applied additional pressure within the Raker Act debate. The Sierra Club and the environmental organizations back east really rallied to preserve the Hetch Hetchy Valley in its natural state. However, most of the senators and congressmen really did feel that San Francisco had an argument for needing the supplies, and so we ended up being granted the Raker Act and the building of Hetch Hetchy. This is a picture of the valley before the dam. One thing that was really important to note, and that was important in the Raker Act, was that we had to protect Modesto and Turlock irrigation districts' water rights. They had senior water rights to San Francisco along the river, and in order to acknowledge and protect those rights, the Raker Act included provisions that provide for water to be sent down to the districts in a priority fashion. San Francisco still has to do that today. They get the first several thousand cubic feet per second during most of the year, and during the runoff period it goes up to about 4,100 cubic feet per second. That was something that was very, very important within the Raker Act. And there's another picture of the valley. You can see the railroad tracked in the foreground. Constructing a major water system in a remote territory was really difficult, so the first thing that we did was construct a railroad to get the supplies up there. This is a picture that includes the chief engineer, Michael O'Shaughnessy, and like I said, the first task was constructing that railroad. Just, again, a nice demonstration of leaving Camp Mather in the snow with the railroads. I can't really imagine how it must have been to actually move that, move through the system. Very, very tough. So in 1923, the dam was constructed and completed to a height of 226 feet and a capacity of 206,000 acre feet. The first water from Hetch Hetchy arrived at the Pulgus Water Temple down in the peninsula on October 24th, 1934 at 10 a.m. to Grand Bear. And this is the dam today. In 1938, we actually raised the dam another 85.5 feet to a total capacity of the reservoir of 360,000 acre feet. And in this picture, you see releases coming out of the face of the dam. Those are to provide flow downstream for the environment, and also to make room for melting snow. On the power system side, I'm not going to talk a lot about it because Charles Sheehan will talk about power following my presentation. But in the system, there are 3 powerhouses of the Mehetchi system. The home powerhouse, which was completed in 1960, it's the largest in the system with 170 megawatts. Kirkwood Powerhouse, built in 1967. And Kirkwood Powerhouse just generates as a consequence of delivering water. The water out of Hetchy goes through Kirkwood Powerhouse on its way to San Francisco, and it has a maximum of 116 megawatts. Moccasin was originally built in 1925. It was the oldest. At that time, it had about an 80 megawatt capacity. In 1959, they expanded it to 110. So total peaking capacity of about 400 megawatts, annual generation of 1,700 gigawatt hours. There's 2 main switchyards, 2 substations, and 4 interconnect substations. Some folks don't know this, but we do own the transmission from Hetchy all the way to Newark, all the way down to the Bay Area. And I should probably also say that Charles will get into it. All of the power that's generated is used for municipal purposes in San Francisco. So our library, San Francisco Airport, the school district, City Hall, the muni system, etc. So this is what the system looks like basically today. Just as a reminder, we've got our 3 reservoirs up country and our 5 reservoirs locally. We also have the powerhouses that I mentioned, the home powerhouse that generates off of Cherry Lake in Eleanor, and the Kirkwood powerhouse that generates off of Hetchy, as does the Moccasin powerhouse as the water moves to the Bay Area.
What is the distance between Hetchy and San Francisco?
About 176 miles. Yeah. And then the 2 treatment plants, which I mentioned on the East Bay side, we have the Sonoma Valley Water Treatment Plant that treats water from San Antonio Reservoir and Calaveras Reservoir, as well as the Harry Tracy Water Treatment Plant on the west side that treats the water from Crystal Springs, San Andreas, and any water that's pumped from Killer Cedos over to Crystal Springs gets treated there as well. Oh gosh, I'm sorry that I can't seem to remember that. Okay, so one of our most significant challenges that we were faced with in really at the end of the last century, I can actually say that now, is an aging system. I mentioned that a lot of our system was built in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and had not had actually a lot of maintenance done to it because there was also not a lot of redundancy in the system. The tunnels and the pipelines that bring the water from Hetchy all the way to the Bay Area are not built with redundancy, particularly the tunnels, and so you couldn't really shut down the system at any time to maintain it without big interruptions to deliveries. And so we embarked on a program called the Water System Improvement Program to address the aging infrastructure and the lack of redundancy. But also, even more significantly, we have 3 significant earthquake faults that we cross as the water moves from the east to the west. And we didn't have, because the system was built so long ago, we didn't have a lot of seismic safety features built into that part of the system. And so that was another major piece of what we wanted to do. 86 projects within 7 counties, a total cost of $4.6 billion. We're about 80% complete on that system. We started it in 2002, and we expect to be finished with the last project at substantial completion really in December of 2017.
How's that paid for?
It's paid for through rates and bonds, basically. So these were our objectives, again, to address the aging infrastructure, to address seismic reliability, meet water quality regulatory requirements, improve our drought reliability, and then to also meet future demand. We were looking at going out to 2030 on our future demand. Some of the major projects, just to share with you, on the regulatory side, we added an ultraviolet light disinfection facility. This was needed to ensure compliance with new EPA regulations, which requires that all unfiltered water sources such as the Hetchy go through at least two disinfection techniques. And so I had mentioned that we do add chlorine. This is the second disinfection technique. This, yeah.
Can you tell me where this facility is?
It's in Tesla. It's in Tesla. It's the Tesla facility. So if you're driving down I-5, right before you would turn off to go to Modesto, it's on your right side, right up against the mountains.
The reason I ask is I know the Fulgus Water Temple no longer, water used to come in there with
Yeah.
a great roar, and now I've been told it's been taken to a filtration system. Right there's I think a large building there.
The Harry Tracy Water Treatment Plant, but we do move, if Hetchy water, so the Hetchy water was what came to the Fulgus, through the Fulgus Temple. That water can now does now go directly to customers. If we move it into Crystal Springs Reservoir, which we have the ability to do, we will remove the disinfectants from it before dumping it into Crystal Springs. So we'll dechlorinate it, basically. But it's the Hetchy water, if you're thinking about a treatment system, it would be going through Tesla for disinfection, but not your traditional filtration.
Yeah.
So it's not a filter plant per se. It's just using ultraviolet light to kill whatever pathogens are remaining. It is one of the largest UV treatment facilities in California and the third in North America. So it's a pretty big deal for us. It can treat up to 315 million gallons a day. And then our filtration plants also received some improvements and upgrades. One of the biggest things that we wanted to be able to achieve is in the event that we did lose the Hetchy supply, we could still meet our demands using the local reservoirs. And our treatment plants did not have the capacity to be able to meet that demand. So upgrading the treatment plants so that they could meet that demand was one of our biggest goals. And both the Snow Valley Water Treatment Plant and the Harry Tracy Treatment Plant were expanded. Another big project is a new tunnel under the bay. Now this is the first tunnel that's actually ever been drilled under the bay. Most people think that the BART tunnel actually sits on the floor of the bay. So this is one of the first projects to go under the bay. And what this project will do is it will give us the redundancy. We currently have 4 pipelines that travel across the bay, and this will give us the ability to shut down those pipelines and maintain them, do the maintenance that's needed. We also have put in some crossovers that will withstand seismic impact, and so in the event that we do have a major seismic impact, we're at a point where we have we have shored up that part of the system and have the ability to move water after an earthquake. And then in San Francisco, we also did some significant seismic protection projects in our city reservoirs. We also upgraded some pump stations. Our largest project, which is still underway, is the Calaveras Dam Replacement Project. Calaveras Dam was built in 1925. It holds about 98,000 acre-feet of water. To put it into context, Hetchy holds about 360,000. So it's our largest reservoir, drinking water reservoir after Hetchy, and our largest local reservoir. When it was built as an earth and rock-filled dam, and it has been the largest earth and rock-filled dam in the world, actually. But in 2001, we were mandated by the Division of Safety of Dams to reduce the capacity of Calaveras because it's so close to an active fault, and there was concern over the seismic vulnerability of that dam. So we are now at 1/3 of capacity and have been since 2001. The new dam will restore the original capacity and allow for potential reservoir enlargement in the future. This reservoir enlargement was not a core mission of this project. What was just restoring the capacity, but our decision makers felt that if they were going to go through the effort of rebuilding the dam, they ought to do it with a core reservoir that has the ability to be expanded for future generations. Certainly something that through the environmental process we didn't want to take on at the time. I don't think the political will was really there from our commission to take that on, but again, just to provide that ability for the future generations. In terms of meeting our demand as part of the water system improvement program, the goal was really to diversify supply. We were expecting from all of our demand studies that our demand would go from 265 million gallons per day, which was at the time when we did our studies, was the current demand, and it would expand to 300 million gallons per day. So the plan was to look at increasing conservation in San Francisco. San Francisco's been implementing water conservation since the late 1980s. The drought of 1987 through 92 really pushed water conservation through mandatory rationing, but once we passed through that drought, a lot of fixtures had been replaced in people's homes, and there was just a natural tendency towards water conservation. So we have continued that effort. Demand has dropped since the time that we started doing conservation earnestly in San Francisco. Demand's dropped from 116 gallons per capita per day to 85.6 gallons per capita per day. The residential per capita use is around 50 gallons per day. This slide's a little bit old. We reduced again by another gallon per day per person in our residential. But to give you some perspective, the city of Sacramento uses about 207 gallons per capita per day, and the statewide average is 160. So we're at about half of what the statewide average is.
Do you attribute that San Francisco is dirtier, or is it?
We're smellier.
Yeah, right.
No, I think we attribute probably. Yeah, probably part of it is the fact that we don't have a lot of landscaping in San Francisco. We're not a suburban environment, and so we have lots of multifamily units here and high density, and so we just don't see as much that as suburban.
Also, does it cost a lot more in San Francisco than other places? Does it cost all day?
I don't know. It's hard to say. That was a hard one to actually tease out because there's so many multifamily units here, and those folks usually don't see their water bill. So it's hard to say whether or not the cost of water in San Francisco is really causing that change.
Were people to consume less? Was our price change? Did it change the price of the water in order to get people to consume?
We have some form of tiered pricing here. We have 2 tiers. There's an interesting story about when we went to change to tiers, in that we had a huge community of folks come out and say we were presenting a family tax. So the more water you use, the more you would have to pay, and that was anti-family. So we ended up settling with 2 tiers, and the difference between the 2 tiers is about $1.30 per cubic foot, which is about 748 gallons. So for the first 3 cubic feet that you use, you're charged $4.20, and any cubic foot after that is about $5.50. But we had originally tried for 3 tiers to do that, to incentivize conservation. But the best we could do politically was 2 tiers.
So when you say residential use, how does that relate to, say, businesses or the hotel that was named?
So when we say residential use, we actually look at the total residential population, and we divide total residential consumption by that population number to get that residential per capita. Our gross per capita, which is when we then take that population and divide it by our total consumption in the entire city, is about 85.5 gallons per person per day. So it's still quite low for the state, but that would include your businesses, and it would just end up actually really dividing that use from business and institutional on your residents.
Okay, I'm just trying to, because that seems really low.
It's very, very low. No, it is.
The 86 is still pretty low, but.
Yep.
Well, because I would have to admit, here's a heads up,
In our hotel, boy, you turn that little faucet and it comes gushing out.
I know.
It's like, you know what I'm saying? It's
Yeah.
like, I was amazed. But it was tasty.
Good, that's what we want to hear. No, it's, we really, when we think about who we need to hit for more conservation, the hospitality industry is just an immediate of really trying to go to that hospitality industry. But we've learned a lot in talking with the hospitality industry about how you actually get fixture replacement in the hotel. You have to, for some of them, it's really easy. For a faucet, just to change the aerator to bring it down to less gallons per minute of water coming out, you can probably do that while you're servicing the room in a day. But if you want to change out the toilet, you may have to have a vacancy in that room in order to change that toilet out. So some of the fixture replacement is sort of interesting when you talk to that hospitality industry about how you implement it and coordinate it. It's a lot more complicated than we thought when we went into it. Hey, we've got money for you to switch out your toilets. Why don't you do it next week?
Yeah.
Like, well, that's going to take us 2 years. Yeah.
What percentage of the overall usage is residential?
In San Francisco, I had a feeling you would ask me that and I forgot to look, but we're about, multifamily and single family is around 40%, 40 to 50%. So it's a significant amount. Let's see, another part of our water supply diversification was recycled water. 4 projects in San Francisco. 2 of our projects have been completed, and that's to provide treated wastewater for irrigating golf courses. So 2 of our public golf courses in San Francisco, actually one is in the city of Pacifica, but it's on San Francisco land, are receiving recycled water for their irrigation. And then we have 2 other projects in planning stages. One would provide recycled water to Golden Gate Park, and the other is to look at providing recycled water on the east side of San Francisco for toilet flushing and open space. Recycled water is kind of an interesting issue here in San Francisco because we don't have a lot of open space and we don't have a lot of irrigation, and that's really kind of your first customer for recycled water. To provide recycled water for toilet flushing, you need to have dual plumbed buildings. I mean, so much of our real estate here is old, and the buildings are old, and they don't have the dual plumbing in them already. So to provide recycled water to them, they can't do much with it because they don't have the dual plumbing. And to put in the dual plumbing is extremely expensive. You're talking about opening up walls and putting in another plumbing system. So our market for recycled water is restricted to new development that can actually put in the dual plumbing systems and irrigation. It's just one of those things that we think is really important to do, but just don't have a lot of opportunity here in San Francisco for it. The other projects that were part of our water supply diversification plan was groundwater. In San Francisco, we do pump a little bit of groundwater to serve Golden Gate Park. It's about 2.5 million gallons per day. We don't drink any groundwater right now, but this project was to actually expand the groundwater to 4 million gallons per day and actually put that groundwater into the distribution system, blended with the rest of the supply. And maybe I should give you guys some context. San Francisco uses about 65 gallons per day, 65 million gallons per day. So when we're talking about 4 million gallons per day of a groundwater project, you're not quite 10%, but it's a significant amount, and it's helpful, yeah.
How do the different utilities that use the same water sources talk about supply? Like how much is available?
You mean like our customers?
No, I'm thinking like if you're sharing a source between different municipalities, how is it transmitted? How much there is versus how much is being used? I mean, it's a pretty ignorant question. I just
No, it's a good question. It's a question that's really important for today when we don't have all of the water that we'd like to have because of the drought. So in normal and wet years, we have plenty of supply, and our customers aren't constrained. We can deliver whatever they need, but we do have contracts with them that restrict them to how much they can have. Those contracts have been negotiated and have been in place since the early 80s. All 27 of our customers have what we call a supply guarantee. They're guaranteed a certain amount from the system. I would say 80% of our customers, their demands are less than their guarantee, so we're not bumping up against that. But in a dry year, we may not even be able to meet what their demands are. And so we actually have agreements in place that say how much they'll get in a dry year too, and we can ratchet it down. How do we know? We have meters, so all of the water that's running through the transmission and going into that community has a meter, and we read those meters. That's how we bill them, to know how much water has gone across. And while we wouldn't necessarily cut them off, we wouldn't go and cut that meter off, stub the meter as they call it, we would make note, especially in dry years, if we put in excess use charges, they would be charged for using that water. Basically try and control their use by charging them more money. But for our distribution system and our transmission system, it's all based on contracts that we have in place. And
So what if you can't fill your part of the contract, I guess? I mean, how are you regulating the supply side? To know how much you have, I guess. It's probably just technology, right?
Yeah, so we know how much we have in our reservoirs. We have lots of gauges in the reservoir that tell us how much water is actually in it. And we do forecasting. So what we'll do, particularly in a year like this, we're doing it every week. We're looking at how much snowpack we have, and we have sensors out in the snowpack to tell us how much snow there is. And it tells us in terms of snow water equivalent in inches, and we can convert that into inflow into our reservoir. So we know how much water is going to come in. And for our rain-fed system, we do the same thing. We don't have sensors for snow, but we know how much water we're getting from inflow. We are able to meter. And you can also just look at it in terms of the change in elevation from day to day. And we will forecast knowing what our demands are and how much we have in our reservoirs and how much inflow we expect to come in. We can forecast from 1 month to the next how much water we think we have. And we will do a forecast for 18 months. We'll say we need to deliver all of these customers water for the next 18 months. Can what we have in storage do that? And if it can't, we'll go to our customers and say we have to actually reduce the amount that you're taking. We're in a reduction right now. San Francisco has asked its customers to cut back its use by 10%. And it's a monitoring situation where we're monitoring our reservoirs all the time, and we're monitoring how much we're providing to our customers, how much they're using, and making sure that that's going to balance out. But you're doing it day to day, but you have a long-term plan. Yeah.
You said San Francisco's using 65 million gallons. What's the whole system?
Right at last year, the whole system used 222 million gallons per day. So San Francisco uses about a third of what the entire service area needs.
And because PUC is a San Francisco entity, you privilege San Francisco
No.
above.
We don't. We have our customers are very